The war room on orbiting Station 9 Vela reeked of ambition. Polished boots, fresh uniforms, gleaming insignias pinned too straight on chests that hadn't faced a single shot fired in anger. They called them officers. I called them children. "Admiral Thorne," one of them chirped, all polished horns and 2 white teeth. "We're honored you could join us. The war game debrief has concluded. Now we were hoping you'd... well..." He trailed off, uncertain how to phrase what he meant. Another stepped in. "A story, sir. One of the real ones. Not from simulations. From you." The others nodded eagerly, some adjusting their posture as if that would make them look more like warriors. I sighed. "You want a story," I said. The room hushed. I folded my forearms across my chest, the tips of my claws clicking lightly against my breastplate. One of the younglings flinched at the sound. "Good. You don't want a story," I said again. "You want a warning." I waited until the lights dimmed, until their fake bravery was swallowed by silence. Then I leaned forward. "Tell me, have you heard of Lieutenant Miller?" Confused looks, blank stares. One of them, an Avari with slicked-back quill horns, whispered, "Human." "Correct," I said. That got their attention. Humans, the Confederation's latest recruits, technically allies, mostly a mystery, whispers of battlefield tenacity, unofficial reports of combat incidents that made no tactical sense, but ended in victories anyway. I had seen it firsthand, and I still wasn't sure I'd recovered. "It was during the Thresher sweep," I began. "Cycle 344. Screeny Horde had broken our lines on Vector Ridge. 3 battalions routed. 4th Company gone silent. We assumed them wiped." One of the officers nodded. "Yes, the Thresher sweep. It's in the campaign archive." "Then your archive doesn't mention what we found when we landed." "We touched down in an ash storm. My gunship sank 1/2 meter into sludge, blood, melted metal, and screeny shell dust. Visibility was trash. Comms were worse. The entire valley was a graveyard stitched together by lightning. My squad swept south, looking for stragglers. What we found was one. "A lone soldier?" one officer asked, incredulous. I turned to him. "No. A human soldier." He was leaning against a collapsed bunker wall, left leg missing below the knee, tied off with what looked like his own thermal scarf, left eye swollen shut, right arm mangled and covered in grime, and in his right hand, a sidearm, still hot. I approached, slow, flanked by my 2nd and 3rd. We wore full armor. He didn't flinch, didn't look up, just muttered, "You're late." My 3rd, Sharik, took a step forward and immediately had a plasma knife to the throat. Not ours. His. I hadn't even seen him draw it. His body screamed of death, bones wrong, muscles twitching, but his grip, his intent, unshaken. I remember saying, "Easy, soldier. We're not the enemy." He didn't blink. "You glow red," he said. "So did they." Sharik muttered, "What the void's wrong with him?" "Nothing," I said. "He's still fighting." The others in the room were silent now, even the quill-horned one. I leaned forward. The screeny didn't kill him. He wouldn't let them. I saw 20 husks within 10 meters of where he sat, melted, crushed, skewered on broken beams. "He was alone?" someone asked. "He'd been alone for 18 hours. "He should have been dead," another whispered. "Yes," I said, "but humans don't die like we do. Not when it matters." One of the younger officers, a tall feline type with bright blue stripes, raised her hand like she was back in academy. "Sir, if I may, why didn't he evacuate?" I looked at her. He was the evacuation. His company was hit hard. He ordered the retreat and held the rear. We found his comm logs later. He stayed to cover the last gunner being airlifted out. She blinked. "But, sir, his condition?" I nodded. He was down to his last magazine, 3 rounds, bleeding out, half-blind, and he still said this when we tried to carry him to the ship. I stood and recited it, word for word. "We don't celebrate the dying. We celebrate the ones who gave them a reason to die right." The room went still. I let the silence stretch, then sat again. He didn't ask for medals or praise. He asked if the evac made it. I looked at each of them, one by one. He asked if the people he covered got out. Then he passed out in my arms. One of them finally whispered, "Did he make it?" I smiled. Hell yes, he did. And 2 weeks later, he walked into briefing with a new prosthetic and saluted me. They stared at me. And you know what he said? I mimicked the human voice as best I could. "Next time, I bring a bigger knife." A few laughed nervously, but I didn't. "I still have that knife," I said. I reached into my coat and pulled it free, a short, battered blade with a scorched grip. "I keep it with me not as a weapon, but a reminder." I tapped the metal. Humans aren't just dangerous because of their weapons, or their strength, or their chaos. I let the words land. They're dangerous because they keep going long after it stops making sense. The lights in the room flickered. Some of the officers looked uneasy. Good. I stood. "That's your story." I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "You want to be ready for war?" "Yes, sir," someone said quietly. "Then stop expecting to understand your allies." I turned once more, holding up the knife. Because the day a human turns toward you and says, "I've got this," you'd better believe them. 18 hours. That's how long Lieutenant Miller had held the ravine. Not a fortified trench, not a shielded garrison. A shattered, half-buried bunker cracked open by plasma artillery, surrounded on 3 sides by what used to be his unit, and on the 4th by the enemy. We didn't know the full details until later. I only knew what I saw. But what I learned, that hour changed everything I thought I understood about humans. We landed during twilight, if you can call it that. The atmosphere was choked with screeny toxin clouds, their orange glow pulsing like diseased lightning across the blackened sky. The terrain was unrecognizable, even for our AI map systems. Metal fused with stone, bodies turned into charcoal. You didn't walk on dirt, you crunched over what used to be positions. He was there, right where the last signal pinged, a slumped silhouette against the wall. But there were signs of movement, fresh scorch marks, a trail of blood still drying, bits of scavenged armor, screeny and human both, repurposed into makeshift barricades. My third in command, Sharik, raised his rifle. I didn't. Something about the air around the human felt tense, charged, and then he twitched. "Hold!" I barked. My squad froze. Miller lifted his head slowly, one eye swollen shut, the other narrowed like a predator cornered in a cage. "Identify," he croaked. "I'm Admiral Kel Thorne, Confederation Response Team 47. We got your beacon." He blinked, then muttered, "Too late." He tried to stand. He failed. Sharik moved to help. That's when we saw it. The charge beacon, wedged beneath Miller's body, linked to a dead man's switch in his fingers. One twitch, and the entire bunker would have gone up in fire. We all froze. Even now, delirious and broken, he wasn't defenseless. He released it, not in fear, in calculation. "Figured I had 5 minutes before they found me," he said. "Didn't want to get chewed alive." That's when I realized he hadn't stayed here to fight. He'd stayed here to deny them his body. And if that doesn't shake you, you don't understand war. He wasn't supposed to still be alive. Plasma scoring on his chest plate, a cracked rebreather barely attached, multiple lacerations and what looked like a makeshift splint made from melted rifle parts. I asked the only question I could muster. "Why didn't you signal sooner?" He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. "I was busy." We began preparing extraction. Medics ran triage scans and applied trauma foam. Miller growled through the pain but never passed out. My comms officer, Revac, picked up residual traces nearby, screeny patrols. They'd come back. I gave the order to pull out, but Miller, half conscious, grabbed my forearm. "Leave the charge beacon." I frowned. "You're in no condition to—" "Leave it," he repeated, then added, "I'm not done yet." That should have been the end of it. We should have lifted off, let him rest, put him in a coma tank for recovery. But when we reached the edge of the extraction point, alarms flared. The screeny had tracked our signal, half their warband, still functional. They swarmed the canyon ridge with speed I didn't expect. We were pinned. We returned fire, but they were too many. We had minutes, at best. That's when Miller stood. Not asked, not requested. Stood, one leg braced with synthetic foam and a piece of durasteel, his rebreather spitting sparks, and he looked at me and said, Hold your fire. I'll draw them. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because I saw in his eyes the thing no commander wants to admit exists. A man who had already accepted his death, but wasn't done spending it yet. I grabbed his arm. Don't. He shook his head. Your team's still breathing. That's reason enough. And then, before I could stop him, he took the detonation pack and ran toward the ridge. No armor, no support, just a broken man and a bag of high-yield charges. He screamed as he moved, not in pain, in rage. I swear the screeny stopped cold. They didn't expect a countercharge, not from a limping corpse, not from him. He got close, too close. Their formation panicked, scattered. Some broke rank, others fired wildly. We saw the charge trigger flash blue in his hand. He turned once, locking eyes with me from the far ridge, and smiled. The explosion cracked the canyon in half. Our sensors went blind for 10 seconds. When they returned, no more enemy contacts, just debris and a crater. We pulled out in silence. No songs, no fanfare. But I carried something with me that day I've never let go of. His knife, recovered from the impact site, scorched, bent, still sharp. Back in the war room, one of the young officers finally spoke. Did he survive? I looked down at the blade and nodded. Yeah. The room gasped. He crawled out of the wreckage after the blast, half deaf, covered in shrapnel, found by a scout drone a day later, dragging his own leg behind him. I paused. And you know what the first thing he asked was? The room leaned in. Did it work? I put the blade on the table. Humans don't care if they survive. They care if it matters that they didn't. The room was dead silent now. All that academy pride, gone, replaced with respect. You wanted a story, I said again, standing. That's your story. And as I turned to leave, I gave them one last truth. Never count a human out. I held up the knife. Because even their last breath might be your last mistake. He should have died. That was the universal consensus. Among my officers, my medics, even the surgeons back at base. Lieutenant Miller should not have survived. A human with a collapsed lung, 3 broken ribs, a severed leg, shrapnel in the liver, and neural trauma from proximity detonation does not walk away. He doesn't wake up. He doesn't speak clearly 2 days later, and he sure as void doesn't ask for his knife back. But that's what he did. We were in the medical wing of the Arcos Command Hospital, deep in Confederation space, a place where admirals go to heal in privacy, where war heroes go to quietly fade. But Miller, he came back angrier, not bitter, not broken, focused. He woke up after 49 hours on regenerative drip. His first word? Status. Not, where am I? Not, am I alive? Just, status. I was there. He didn't know it, but I'd refused to leave the sector until I saw him open his eyes. He turned his head, bandaged nearly head to toe, and blinked at me with his remaining eye. Oh, you. Yeah, I said. Me. You still glow red in low light, he muttered. Bad design. Then he passed out again. He was on his feet in less than a month. Less than a month. One leg replaced with a titanium carbon prosthetic, fitted like it had grown from bone. The neural interface fused faster than predicted, probably because he refused to let the therapy slow him down. He walked into the operations hangar like he'd just come back from shore leave. Lieutenant, I said, you're not cleared for duty. He smirked. I'm not here to take orders. Then why are you here? He held up a small black case, opened it. Inside, the knife, the one I'd pulled from the blast site, bent, scarred, still caked in soot. Figured you were keeping this warm for me, he said. I stared at him. He wasn't being dramatic. He meant it. I finally asked him what I'd been trying to process since the ravine. Why didn't you give up? He paused, then said something I'll never forget. Because giving up wouldn't have saved anyone. We talked long after that. Not often, but enough. Enough for me to learn something few in our high command had grasped. Humans don't fight because they love violence. They don't push forward because they're fearless. They do it because they've made peace with being hurt, as long as it means someone else doesn't have to be. There was a moment, a quiet one, that still haunts me. A week after his return, we held a medal ceremony. You know the type. Applause, flags. The whole room filled with posturing and pride. He stood in front of the Confederation Council, wearing full dress uniform, one leg metal, one eye replaced, arm braced with neurofused carbon, and they read out his citation. For valor beyond reason, for holding the line against impossible odds, for demonstrating the full courage and commitment of the Terran people. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't smile, just waited. Then, as they pinned the medal to his chest, one of the junior officers asked him, "How did you do it, Lieutenant?" He looked the officer in the eye and said, "We don't die quietly." That room, filled with dignitaries, generals, councillors, went silent. Not because it was a threat, but because it was a statement of fact, a cultural truth from a species that had survived planetary collapse, climate death, civil wars, orbital bombardment, and still came to our aid when asked. After that day, I changed my training programs. New recruits were no longer taught that humans were just resilient allies. They were taught the real truth, that humans, when cornered, become something else, something worse than death. They become the reason you don't sleep well. I remember pulling Miller aside before he left the station for reassignment. "Where are you headed?" He gave me a look that almost passed for amusement. "Back to the front." "You just came from the front. There's another one now." I stared at him. "You're going to die one day, you know." He nodded. "Yeah, just not today." Then he saluted, turned, and walked away, limping, sure, but unbroken. To this day, I still carry that knife. He let me keep it, said it was a good reminder of what sharp things look like. He's not wrong. In the war room, the young officers had gone pale, not in fear, in recalibration. One of them, voice low, asked, "Sir, do all humans fight like that?" I considered it, then replied, "Only the ones you underestimate. They say war ends when the last shot's fired. They're wrong. War ends when the ones who survive figure out what comes next. And humans, for all their ferocity, know how to survive better than any species I've ever served with. But what unsettled me most wasn't their violence. It was what they did after. 2 cycles after the Ravine stand, I was deployed to the Verix Offensive, a large-scale campaign to reclaim the outer colonies from the fractured Varnock Combine. The operation was supposed to be surgical, clean, efficient, but the Varnock had no intention of making it clean. And the humans we brought with us, they didn't come for clean either. They came for each other. The Battle of Tremaire's Gate started like most planetary drops. Coordinated strikes, tactical divisions, shielded landers. It ended with hand-to-hand combat in ash-choked alleys and the sound of humans shouting numbers that didn't match our battlefield codes. I later learned it was their version of counting grenades. They shouted the number out before they threw it, so their squad mates would know when to duck. I found myself once again standing beside the aftermath of human firepower. Buildings were gone, the enemy was gone, and in the center of the rubble, smoke rising, stood a fire team of Terran infantry, helmeted, bloodied, not a word spoken. One of them was missing an arm, another had their leg wrapped in pressure foam, a piece of broken armor tied off like a tourniquet. And yet, none of them called for evac. None of them asked for medics. They were too busy tending to the newest soldier among them. An alien, my kind. Lieutenant Sornek was a communications officer assigned to human support. Smart, logical, tactical, and in that moment, curled in the mud, shaking. He'd never seen real combat before. He thought he was ready. He wasn't. And the humans? They didn't mock him. They didn't ignore him. They sat around him, quietly. One removed his helmet. Blood matted his hair. He handed Sornek a ration bar. "Here," the human said. "Eat this. You're not dying today." Another pulled off his own armored glove, took Sornek's trembling claw. Deep breath. In. Outside. Good. Again. They never raised their voices, never barked, just sat with him, until the shaking stopped. Later, I asked one of them, "Why did you stop to help him?" The human blinked. "What do you mean?" "You were wounded, low on supplies. You had a clear evac path." He just shrugged. "We don't leave the broken ones behind. That's when they need you most." That's when it hit me. To humans, war wasn't just fighting. It was carrying. Carrying the wounded, carrying the scared, carrying the memory of those who didn't make it. They didn't measure success by kill counts or territory. They measured it by how many they could bring home. I remember sitting alone that night in my quarters, watching the replay footage. One of the humans, Corporal Diaz, had been shot 3 times during the rescue. He didn't tell anyone, just kept walking, kept talking to Soreneck, keeping him calm, collapsed only after they were airborne. He lived, but not because of luck, because his squad treated his pain as their problem. They redistributed gear. One carried his pack. One injected him when he started to fade. Nobody asked. Nobody waited. Later, I spoke with Soreneck. He couldn't stop shaking. He couldn't stop crying. He thought the humans would abandon him once they saw he wasn't soldier material. But they didn't. They brought him tea, laughed at bad jokes, sat through the night beside his cot, and when he finally found the words, he asked me, "Why do they care so much?" I didn't have an answer then. But now I think I do. Humans fight to win, yes, but they fight together, and they refuse to let pain become isolation. It's why they terrify our enemies, not because they bring better guns, but because they bring each other, no matter how broken, no matter how scared, no matter how far gone. In the war room, one of the junior officers wiped his eyes. I said nothing. Another whispered, "Sir, why are you telling us all this?" I stared at her. "Because one day you'll fight beside them, and when you're bleeding, broken and afraid." I paused. "They won't ask if you're worth saving. They'll just save you." They wanted warriors. What they got was a species who turns every loss into a reason to fight harder. The last time I saw humans fight, I almost mistook them for monsters, not because of what they destroyed, but because of what they refused to become. The Battle of Castral's Reach wasn't supposed to happen. The peace accords had been signed. The Confederation fleet had stood down. The Zorith had accepted the ceasefire terms. But someone, always someone, didn't get the message. A splinter group broke formation, hit a refugee convoy. No defenses, no warning, just families, civilians, children. I watched it happen from orbit. I watched the panic, the flames, the desperation, and I watched the humans deploy before I even gave the order. They didn't ask. They didn't wait. They moved. What followed was less a battle, more a response. The human platoon, only 27 soldiers, dropped onto the convoy remnants under enemy fire. Their orders were clear: rescue, defend, evacuate, no vengeance, no retaliation, just shield the innocent. I arrived 2 hours later. By then, the Zorith were gone, fled, routed, burned from the sky. But not by the humans, by their own cowardice, after realizing the humans weren't retreating. They were digging in. I found the field commander, Captain Amira Locke, standing on the ridge, face streaked with blood, one arm in a sling, still giving orders. Around her, the scene was surreal. Children clung to her legs. Wounded aliens leaned against human shoulders. Medics worked in sync across languages, across species. And the humans, not one had rested. I approached her. "Captain." She looked at me, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. "Admiral, you weren't ordered to deploy." She nodded. "They needed help, so we helped." Simple as that. I gestured to the field. 27 against a full wing of Zorith. How? She looked past me toward the smoldering horizon. "We made them believe we were more than we are." Later, I reviewed the combat footage. They used terrain like chess pieces, forced the enemy into narrow gullies, deployed smoke where they lacked cover, broadcast fake comm signals to simulate reinforcements. But none of that was what struck me. It was how they moved, always in pairs, always pulling someone else behind them. No one left alone, not even the dying. One clip still plays in my head. A human, mortally wounded, dragged a Varnok child out of a crater. When his squad reached him, he handed the child off, smiled once, and died without a sound. That moment defined it. Humans don't fight to dominate. They fight to protect, even when it kills them, especially when it kills them. I brought this up once to a counselor, said, "They don't fear death the way we do." She shook her head. "No," she said. "They just decided it's not the worst thing that can happen." After Castral's Reach, the Confederation changed its training doctrine. Human units were no longer assigned special risk status. They were given a new designation, Resolve Priority Units, because if humans were present, the battle had already changed. And me? I retired the year after, not because I was done fighting, but because I'd already learned the most important lesson war had to teach me, that humanity's greatest weapon is not their technology, not their ferocity, it's their unshakable bond to one another. They don't abandon, they don't forget, and when all hope burns out, they become the fire themselves. In the war room, the officers were silent. I looked at each of them, no longer recruits, no longer idealists, now students of truth. I held up the knife one last time. This isn't a relic, it's a reminder. I met their eyes. Humans may look like us, they may bleed like us, but never assume they'll break like us. I sheathed the blade. They don't fall. I stepped back into the shadows. They rise.